This recipe comes with an amusing story. Sometime in the 1950s, my father was having dinner with a couple of friends in San Francisco at Alioto's, which was one of the finest Italian-American restaurants on the West Coast. It's still there, but a shadow of its former glory days. One of the dishes arrived at the table, an au gratin dish of roasted, buttered spaghetti that had one meatball resting on top of it. The price was $1, which was about $8 in today's money. My father's friend fell in love with the meatball. He'd never tasted anything like it before and told the waiter to bring him an entire plate of just this meatball, even though it wasn't on the menu. The waiter obliged, but when they got the bill, they found they'd been charged $1 per meatball, so this cost was about $200 in today's money for that one plate. Fortunately, he was wealthy and paid the check, but the meatball became a legend in our family. Read the annotations at the start of this video to learn the rest of the story.
Dry the meat off here. First step. And I'm not using an especially good cut, as you can see. It is, of course, salt. Of course, black pepper. All the sides to it like this. This is what you want to see, deep caramelization on all sides. The inside is going to be almost raw, but that won't matter because it's going to be ground up and cooked again. But this outside crust is part of the flavor. It's an integral part of the flavor. So I let it cool a little bit, I wrapped it up in cling film, and now this is going to go into the refrigerator until the next day. Now this is the next morning. I've got much more meat here than I need for this recipe, so I'm going to cut it up and weigh it. I want 600 grams. The rest you can grind up for some other thing. You can throw it in with hamburgers or something else. Maybe you're lucky and you only have 600 grams. It's better to have too much, of course, and cut it down than it is to have too little. If you did it right, this is what you should see. Should be almost completely raw in the center, just this little ring around the edge that's cooked, and the flavor, of course, in this caramelized Maillard reaction is really what it is, not caramelization on the outside skin. Now I'm going to cut it up into pieces that are fine for the meat grinder, and then I'm going to turn my attention to the pork. I've got a couple of pork chops here. Now these had this very thick skin rind around the edge. I just trimmed this off. We're not going to use that. Won't go through the grinder. Good for making cracklings, not good for this. So what we want is the fattiest parts. I'm going to cut along here. I'm going to use this fat part on both of these. Okay, this is what I got. Mostly fat. You can see there's a little bit of pork meat in here, but it's mostly fat. And it's about 90, just a little bit over 90 grams. Now all this is going to get ran through the meat grinder 2 times. It has to go through 2 times. I've weighed out 50 grams of breadcrumbs into the food processor bowl. I'm going to deal with the other dry ingredients. I didn't really mince it. I cut the garlic up into small pieces, really small pieces, chopped it finely about 10 minutes ago, and I let it stand. The reason for this is explained in volume 2 of my cookbook. Don't just chop it and add it in directly. It won't have the same effect. I've got a small handful of basil leaves here. Kind of hard to measure this small amount. You know, if it was we're scaling this up, I could tell you how much this is in grams. Best way here is just go for a small handful. I've got the shallot, which I'm going to chop up coarsely before I put it into the food processor, and I've got the black olives, which I drained on a sieve. You want to get as much of the moisture off of these as you can. Okay, I have all of those ingredients in. I'm adding the basil leaves, which I've chopped up some too to assist the food processor, make sure that everything gets cut up evenly. So now it's quite even, as you can see. Now I'm going to add the egg. Now normally I only use egg yolk in meatballs, but this is an exception because part of the meat was cooked and it needs the extra binding properties and moisture of the white as well. It's a rare exception. So I'll grind this together now. After this has been ground up a little bit, we're going to, with the egg, I'm scraping down the sides. Now I'm going to add the MSG and the salt. And you don't have to use MSG, as I explained in the beginning. It's a mistake not to. It will add great flavor. There's no reason not to. So, final grind here with the salt and the MSG. Okay, that's homogeneous. Now we're going to mix it in with the meat. I just scraped the food processor bowl out into a larger bowl that has the meat that was passed through the meat grinder 2 times, and now this needs to get mixed. I'm going to begin mixing it like this, but I'll have to end up using my fingers to finish the mixing. Don't over knead it; you'll make them tough. But in this case, you don't have to worry about that too much because these meatballs are going to be very tender anyway. So it's not as critical as when you're mixing completely raw meat, where you can easily turn the meatballs into, like, hard rocks. This isn't going to be quite so sensitive, but still, don't go crazy and knead it like you're making bread or something. Sprinkle a little flour down on the plate, and then roll your meatballs and put them out onto the floured plate. And you don't have to do them all at once. You can do just a few at a time. Save the rest in a closed container or under cling film in the refrigerator for up to certainly a full day, if not 2 days. So I roll them in a little bit more flour like this. This will give them nice surface texture, also help keep them from breaking up when you're frying them. And now we're going to heat up some olive oil in a skillet, non-stick skillet. And have enough olive oil here to coat the bottom. The pan's already hot. But not scorching hot. We don't want to have the meatballs just sizzling away the moment they enter. You want to coat them with that oil so it sticks to the flour. Let's move them around a little bit until they begin to brown. If you want to make them beautiful, you want to try to get them to cook as evenly as possible on all sides. Of course, there's going to be some surfaces that are brown more than others. It's just the nature of meatballs. And after you get the initial brown on them, you can start moving them off to the side here, where the heat in the pan is even. Remember, the edges of the pan are even. The center contains all the hot spots. So you want very even cooking. You always cook your meatballs. The majority of the cook takes place at the edge of the pan. This also gives you a side wall here to use to push the meatballs up against to help cook the sides at the same time. So you get 2 surfaces cooking instead of just whatever touches the exact bottom of the pan. Now, while this is sizzling away, talk about the wine. I'm using an Amarone for this. You want to use a very good wine if you can for this, because the wine is the sauce. Amarone is not a wine that a lot of people are familiar with, but it's a very interesting wine from Veneto in Italy. And what's different about it, it is a dry wine, but they take the grapes and they age them, dry them out in the sun for 2 or 3 months before they make the wine. Kind of like making wine from raisins, which is kind of funny because there's an old Stephen Wright's a comedian from long ago. I don't think he's around anymore, but one of his jokes used to be that I'm going to make wine from raisins, that way I don't have to wait for it to age. Apparently he didn't realize somebody had already thought of that, and that's what Amarone basically is. It isn't really aged like that. It's a thing all its own. But the flavors of an Amarone are very interesting. They're usually peppery, and they have some fruit elements to them, as well as herbal notes. It's an intense wine, not a cheap wine. Very Italian. It's a great choice here if you have it. But like I said, it's not a cheap wine. This is a fairly expensive wine. If you go to a wine shop, Amarone's going to be one of the more expensive wines you find. So, enough yapping here. I'm just going to continue cooking these for another couple of minutes, turning them over frequently to get them as even as possible on the outside, cooked on the outside. Okay, by the way, the whole time here, I've had the heat on about number 6 out of 1 to 10. Now you can see some definite browning here on the surface. I don't know if you can see it in this camera, but it's there. This is a good point. You've got some crust, light crust, formed on the outside of the meatballs. That's what you want. Now what I'm going to do, a little bit more cooking. This is only crust really on one side. I'm going to give it just another 30 seconds here. Okay, it's been about another minute actually. I'm satisfied. This is good. Now, how much Amarone you add to this will determine how much sauce you have and how rich the flavor of the wine is in the meatballs. And I mean, if you're a real teetotaler, you can use water instead of wine in this and still get very tasty meatballs, but obviously it's not the same effect. So now, you see I'm moving them away from the edge to the center of the pan, and I'm adding, quarter of a glass, large glass of the Amarone, covering it up, and I'm letting them steam here like this. I'm turning the heat down to about 3 now on 1 to 10. It's been 2 minutes now by the clock. I'm going to turn these meatballs over, make sure that they're all coated with this wine reduction. Like you see here. Then I'm going to put the lid back on. Give them just a little bit more time to make sure they finish cooking all the way through. Okay, nice and dark, mahogany-like color here. Looks good. Lid goes back on. Here we have it about 3 minutes more in. These are completely cooked. Absolutely beautiful. I have spaghetti that's already been tossed with some butter and Parmesan cheese. I'm putting the meatball nestled down inside of it off to one side, and now this is going to get roasted in the oven just a little bit in order to this is the way that they did it back then. It's just strange for Italians, but nevertheless this is how they did it, so that's what I'm doing. And I'm leaving a space off the side here so I can put the basil when it's done.
The second volume of my cookbook is now available through Amazon and other booksellers. It covers the YouTube recipes from the last 8 months with more in-depth information. I received requests for the procedures on all recipes, and I've listened to you. Every recipe has step-by-step directions, and of course there are recipes that aren't on YouTube. But this is not just a recipe book. Far from it, as you can see from some of the topics scrolling by here. I'm certain that anyone who watches my channel and any serious cook will find this book a treasury of useful and new information you won't find anywhere else. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.